The title of my talk is Blockchain for Supply Chain. Just to give a short intro about IoTeX before we get started. IoTeX has a vision for what we call the Internet of Trusted Things. It's an open network where humans and machines can interact with guaranteed trust and privacy. So really the goal of our platform is to enable trusted data from trusted devices for use in trusted applications. We want to make sure like everyday people and everyday businesses can own and control their smart devices, as well as the data and value that they generate. I'm going to walk you through a little bit about the philosophy of why that matters. But just a little bit more about IoTeX. We're fully open source, built 100% from scratch, so we didn't fork any other chains. You can check out our code at github.com/IoTeX project. What really differentiates IoTeX is, we have a very robust layer one blockchain that we built from scratch, but we also layer on IoT middleware and a very IoT oriented developer tools to make building solutions on our platform simple and easy. So things like decentralized identity, we have our own decentralized identity spec that covers both humans and devices. So it kind of allowing devices to talk to each other and talk to other humans is a very important prerequisite for kind of this autonomous future that we all envision. Another thing is decentralized storage. We dabble in confidential computing and secure hardware. And I'm going to walk you through exactly, one of these devices that we have is called Pebble Tracker. And it uses secure hardware to sign and to store private keys and kind of connect the real world with the blockchain world. On the dev tool side, we have a lot of smart contract tools, integrated developer environments to make it easy to launch EVM compatible smart contracts on IoTeX, real world data oracles, etc. One thing that you guys should know about IoTeX is we've been around since 2017, and we really take a research-backed and academic approach to how we've designed our platform. So IoTeX is currently leading blockchain focus groups in a lot of the largest industry groups, such as the Industrial Internet Consortium, the IEEE, China Mobile IoT Alliance. We're the only the public blockchain in that group. And we also partner with a variety of device manufacturers and chip manufacturers. So since early 2019, we've been partnering with Nordic Semiconductor, one of the largest cellular IoT kind of fabless semiconductor manufacturers. We partner with WiseKey, who also does a lot of things in NFC and I guess just secure hardware in general. And finally, we've worked with a lot of different device manufacturers that, look to IoTeX to provide new security and privacy for their products. So one of those products is called UCam. It's actually the first blockchain-powered camera that delivers 100% privacy to users. But that's not really the focus of my talk today. We really wanted to focus on just exactly how IoTeX uses blockchain in order to enable new supply chain capabilities, right? So this is just kind of a schematic of what the platform looks like. But before I dive into exactly what the solution looks like, I wanted to set some context around, what is IoT and why is blockchain important for IoT? I think everyone has a general idea of what Internet of Things is. It's kind of this phenomenon of all these different smart devices being used in our personal and professional lives today. The way I think about IoT is kind of the gateway between the physical and the digital worlds. Everything from cameras, laptops, phones, sensors, vehicles, even the future things that will power our smart cities. These are all under the umbrella of the Internet of Things. But a lot of people think about IoT as a very diverse and expansive ecosystem. But if you think about an IoT device at the core of what it does, the anatomy of that device is very similar to others, right? All devices have some type of sensor, some type of wireless module to transmit that information through Wi-Fi or cellular or low power long range or others. It has some type of battery and some type of power supply. And it has some varying degrees of processing, compute, memory storage, etc. So when you think about it from that perspective, it's important to understand that, generally these IoT devices are doing three things, right? The goal of these devices is really to capture physical phenomena and transmit it or convert it into digital data that we can use to enforce different business logic, or to progress workflows, or simply just to visualize, to provide more of a understanding of the physical world in a digital context. So these three kind of steps are kind of standard for IoT devices as well, right? Or different types of IoT-based solutions. So the concept of acquiring data or capturing data, is through sensors. There's a lot of different types of sensors today, right? Whether it's GPS sensors, different types of climate sensors, motion sensors through accelerometers and gyroscopes, but even things like proximity sensors, smoke sensors, light sensors, alcohol sensors, moisture sensors. All of these things are just kind of hardware that's specifically designed to read, again, physical phenomena or physical properties and convert them into digital data that we can comprehend, right? So this raw data is then processed, whether it's on the device itself, meaning on the edge, or more kind of transmitted to a cloud to do that processing. But all this data, when it in its raw form, is not really useful, right? We have to make sure we aggregate it, we validate it, and we analyze it to extract the value and the insights from that data. So some more powerful devices that are not battery powered may do this directly on the device. Some weaker battery powered devices, like sensors that you deploy in the field that turn on every hour, grab some data, those things are not really suitable for on-device processing, but it's all depending on the architecture you have. And finally, once this data is captured and maybe pre-processed, you need to communicate it, transmit it through a gateway or a cloud to reach the server that you want to run your applications on, right? So this is kind of the traditional way of thinking about it. We always think about, device to cloud, right? A blockchain, doesn't really change too much of this upfront process. I think having blockchain can help you register these devices, make sure that the data coming into your cloud server is trusted. But the real magic is when you combine trusted data with a trusted execution kind of platform. And that's exactly what blockchain does. So another concept that's really important to understand, before I dive into the IoTeX solutions, is all about Web 1.0 and Web 2.0, right? These kind of seem like buzzwords these days. You see it used a lot in different types of contexts, but it's really important to understand what these words mean and why they matter, right? So Web 1.0 started, even in the 1990s and earlier, around these open source standards that really power much of the internet today. Things like TCP/IP, domain name systems, UDP, HTTP. These are all types of open protocols and open standards on top of which a lot of the modern internet runs today, right? But this concept of Web 2.0 started, with the big tech companies like Google in the dot-com boom around the 2000s, right? They started to build proprietary tech stacks on top of Web 1.0. So they're kind of leveraging the openness of Web 1.0, but they're building their own siloed products in different forms where they control the rules, they control the data, they control the value of their ecosystems, right? And for the past 20 years, from maybe 2000 to 2020, this has been okay with us, right? Generally, society has been thinking, okay, all these new features, it's incredible to think that even 10 years ago, Spotify wasn't a thing, DoorDash wasn't a thing, Uber was barely getting started. But the evolution of what these Web 2.0 tech giants have brought to us has transformed the way we live and transformed a lot of the ways that society operates today, right? But we've we've approached a certain tipping point where Web 2.0 has grown so large that, just like some big banks are too big to fail, now we have tech companies that are too big to fail and extracting value from user data. We don't have to remind everyone about the hacks and the things that have gone on from these kind of centralized operations. But it's really important to understand that for the future of what we want to build at a technological level, Google built $1 trillion business on top of Web 1.0, but nobody's ever going to build even $1 billion business on top of Google, because that's the way their ecosystems operate, right? They own the entire full stack of it. So, Web 1.0, Web 2.0 is what I consider to be the age of corporations. bringing intense innovation, amazing new features, but really reaching a tipping point as far as security and privacy goes. So what is Web 3.0, right? Web 3.0 is also building upon the standards of Web 1.0, the open standards that kind of power our internet today, but it is kind of trying to replicate the functionality of Web 2.0, but with a user-centric and self-sovereign mindset, right? Really capitalizing on the open source nature of it, the decentralized nature of it, the fact that nobody will own the platform itself, kind of replacing error-prone and manipulative, oftentimes, intermediaries with trusted code in the form of blockchain, right? These blockchains are also going to be user governed. And like I mentioned earlier, the goal of IoTeX and a lot of other Web3 platforms is to make sure that the data and value that's created by users is also delivered to users and not corporations, right? So this is the promise of Web 3.0, is kind of redesigning our world in ways that are more user-centric and user beneficial. And the important part to understand about this is going to be a massive industry, right? I think we're just reaching the start of Web3, but the next trillion-dollar businesses will be built in this kind of peer-to-peer decentralized mindset. So that's just some context on, some of the problems that IoTeX sees in the world and some of the opportunities that we see as well. But I really want to talk to you guys about one device of ours that is really going to fit into the supply chain mold, I think, very well. And that's called Pebble Tracker. So Pebble Tracker really is a combination of two types of tamper-proof technologies, right? You may be already familiar with tamper-proof hardware, whether you know it or not, right? Tamper-proof hardware is a special type of chip. It uses a isolated part of a processor called a trusted execution environment, and this is called the TEE. This TEE guarantees the integrity and the confidentiality of all processes run within it, and highly considered to be the highest standard for security and privacy for hardware today. Really manages the most sensitive processes in a lot of our daily lives today. A lot of our smartphones, or most all smartphones, have TEEs built into them to do things like holding your keys, managing your Face ID and your fingerprints. The reason why we trust our phones to hold these extremely sensitive biometric and financial and other types of information is because they are cordoned and stored within the trusted execution environment, and it never leaves that secure element, right? So things like credit cards, the secure chip on your credit card is also an example of secure hardware. And for those that are already blockchain savvy, these ledger wallets, these crypto hardware wallets, the reason why you trust them is because they have built-in secure hardware that is guaranteed to not leak your private keys. So tamper-proof hardware already exists today, but the problem is they're proprietary kind of tech stacks, they're closed, and they're generally not available to be programmable by everyday developers, right? So even though they add security and privacy to solutions, they aren't really extensible the way that we want to see them extended, right? They serve the purpose of still the device manufacturers and not necessarily the desires from users fully. On the other side, tamper-proof software, this is what blockchain is all about, right? The ability for nobody to be able to modify or to manipulate the actual platform that our code is run on top of, right? And that's really done through the whole decentralization process, the distribution of computing to many parties instead of one single entity, as well as the governance of the network itself that I mentioned. And this is really, when you combine the concept of tamper-proof hardware and tamper-proof software, then you get tamper-proof solutions, right? You know exactly where your data came from because it can be signed by the tamper-proof hardware. And once it's written to the blockchain or hashed to the blockchain, then you can trace how it's evolved further from its raw data state and used in different types of applications. So Pebble Tracker really is the first, I would say the first device that really combines these two concepts of tamper-proof hardware and tamper-proof software together. So Pebble Tracker is a device that Nordic Semiconductor and IoTeX have been working on for the past 2 years now. The version 1 didn't look like this, but this is our version 2 of Pebble Tracker. And basically, it unleashes the power of verifiable data and establishes a new standard for trust, right? In today's era, we're reaching a point in our history where it's it's hard to question what we trust and why we trust it, right? And there's a popular saying in the Bitcoin ecosystem about the mantra of Bitcoin is always don't trust but verify, right? And that concept I think is going to proliferate to every part of our daily lives. It's going to in the future, with all these deep fakes and misinformation, it's really going to be imperative that we think about why we trust things and what type of proof points we need in order to trust things in the future, right? So IoTeX is really taking this to heart and using this combination of tamper-proof hardware and tamper-proof software to enable next-gen applications that are running on open source firmware and open source software, and utilizing this tamper-proof secure element on the hardware side to ensure that end-to-end trust. It's cellular based, so it takes any international SIM card, and anywhere you can get a cellular signal, you can get a cellular IoT signal as well. So it's a very global product, and that also extends kind of the borderless nature of blockchain. So what kind of data can we get from Pebble Tracker? We know that the Pebble Tracker here, it has a secure element, this box right here from Nordic Semiconductor. It's the NRF 9160 SIP system and package, and it's a very popular kind of open source kind of firmware, open source hardware chip that's very popular with developers these days, especially for mobile type of cellular IoT based applications. So really the goal of Pebble Tracker is to generate verifiable data at the hardware level, at least, right? So Pebble Tracker, the way it does it is captures and cryptographically signs real world data, including GPS information, climate information, motion, and light. So it's a very full 360 view of an asset's environment. And every time the data is captured, it's also signed by the device itself, which is registered to the blockchain. And that really provides a new way to verify that the data that you're looking at is real, right? Or the data that you're going to be placing into your applications is real. And if we think about the way that the future automated world is going to work, without having a trusted input into your algorithm, then you can't really trust the output, right? So this is really a foundational concept where we need to trust the data and be able to. We need to have anyone able to verify the legitimacy of the data if we're ever going to reach this kind of trustless, decentralized, automated world of the future. So the TE on Pebble and the sensors, collect the data, sign the data is transmitted through cellular IoT connectivity, and then kind of visualized and placed onto the blockchain or made available to the blockchain. So going back to our original goal of the IoTeX platform, trusted data from trusted devices to feed trusted applications. I want to talk a little bit about the data side of Pebble now, about what we can do with this data, right? Okay, it's great that we have a lot of data, but the data is really generated by these various sensors on the board, right? We have an environmental sensor, BME, I think 11.6 something, a Bosch environmental sensor. It does temperature, humidity, air quality, and air pressure. We have a light sensor that measures light intensity, or lux. We have a 6-axis motion sensor, gyroscope, and accelerometer to track angular velocity and acceleration. Basically, it can tell you if an asset has moved at all. And there is also 2 versions of GPS on it. There's an external GPS, and there's a GPS built into the NRF 9160 as well. So with those things, we have a really rich set of data that we can really understand what an asset's environment is all about. So in the supply chain context, breaking it down a little bit, so we know what sensors are built into the board here. We know what kind of data, raw data, is being output, right? So this external GPS sensor gives us GPS location in coordinates. This environmental sensor gives us humidity in percentages, temperature, air pressure, and air quality in voltaic compounds, parts per million. It's a PM 2.5 air quality sensor, which is actually fairly accurate for such a small device. There's a motion sensor, again, angular velocity and acceleration. And there's an ambient light sensor that measures light intensity in lux. But again, when we the first thing one of the first slides I had shared is that the raw data is not really valuable unless it's analyzed and the insights are extracted from this raw data, right? So what kind of verifiable insights can we gather from this verifiable data? Well, we can, with a GPS location, we can understand the proximity, of course, to a person or place. In the supply chain context, this is very important if you have multi-stakeholder processes and you want to, you don't want to have, just back-to-back. You want to have a very synchronized way to inform people downstream when you're going to arrive. Of course, GPS location can tell you the distance and the route traveled to optimize different routes over time. And you can also determine whether something is just inside or outside of a geofence. So these are all kind of insights about an asset that you can glean just from this one single metric about GPS location, right? Once we get into the climate side of things, depending on your kind of service levels or your thresholds for different things, it can tell you not only on a binary level, right? Is the asset dry or moist, hot or cold, high or low? But it can also tell you how dry or moist, how hot or how cold, to give you more, customizability as far as how you want to enforce your business logic, your business rules, your SLAs. So we all know that supply chain is all about transporting things around the world in a safe manner, right? When we talk about shipping food, for example, cold chain is a very big concept in supply chain where whether it's a COVID vaccine or a fish from Japan, these things have to be held below certain temperatures or else they're going to spoil, right? There's also very valuable goods that need to be kept under a certain environment or even like cannot be transported above a certain acceleration because of the sensitivity of those parts, right? So the environmental sensor and the motion sensor can really give you a full understanding of how the asset is being treated, right? The angular velocity and the acceleration can tell you things like, has the asset been dropped? Has the asset been kept at an upright orientation? Has the asset been moving fast, slow, or not at all, right? There's also a lot of remote monitoring solutions that Pebble Tracker can enforce, right? Depending on what asset you attach it to, and what type of activities you want to incentivize, there's a lot of different options, but it really starts with having the tamper-proof version, single version of the truth, right? And then finally, light intensity can tell you things like whether a package was opened or unopened. If there's any light readings, that means, someone's opened your package. And also can deal with things like light-sensitive objects, light-needing objects like film or plants or things like that, right? So this is kind of the evolution of raw data that's verifiable into insights that are verifiable. So once we have these insights, then we can start to trigger actions with them, right? We can write business logic in more of an if-then kind of format, right? So if I am 2 miles away from a certain location, then I'm going to send a notification. Or if, the destination has reached the final destination or the asset has reached the final destination, then I'm going to complete the payment, right? So these verifiable insights from the verifiable data are used to trigger various verifiable actions. And this is really the footprints or the foundation for automation, if you think about it, right? Without the verifiable data as the prerequisite or the first step in this process, how can you trust that the actions will be executed in a trusted way, right? So even before we talk about blockchain, the verifiability of the data that's guaranteed by the tamper-proof hardware is already adding a lot of trust into this process. So even without blockchain, developers can use Pebble Tracker to, bring verifiable data into their supply chain prototypes or solutions. But let's talk a little bit about what blockchain can do next to bolster this, right? Um, so this is kind of the overall end-to-end flow, right? The goal of the kind of Pebble Tracker suite of solutions is not only to convert physical phenomena into data, but also bring it to the IoTeX blockchain um, in order to trigger different smart contracts. And smart contracts are meant to be tamper-proof as well and open and verifiable by anyone. So it's really, again, complementary technologies as far as secure hardware and blockchain, tamper-proof hardware, tamper-proof software. So Pebble Tracker will collect, sign, transmit this verifiable real-world data to the cloud and to the blockchain. So the data itself can be stored fully end-to-end encrypted on the cloud and hashed to the blockchain to prove data provenance and data immutability. But where the magic happens is really once we kind of develop a way to bring this verifiable data to the blockchain in order to utilize it in smart contracts and enforce multi-party SLAs, the automated workflows, trigger different types of payments, then there's a whole world of automated actions we can apply based on this verifiable information. For those that aren't too familiar with how a smart contract works, the first thing is that, the contract itself is written in code and deployed onto the blockchain. IoTeX is EVM compatible, so any one of your Solidity-based smart contracts can be easily ported to the IoTeX blockchain, and you can also easily write your own with our really great developer tools and IDEs. So just like it says here, an event will trigger the execution of whatever coded terms you have in that smart contract. So whatever set of if-then statements you have, for example, if the temperature is this high, then I'm going to trigger some type of action, and that's already pre-coded, predefined in the smart contract. So even people that are part of the same process that don't necessarily trust each other, it can all be verifiable because they know that the smart contract, they can read the code of the smart contract to verify exactly what's going on and why things happen the way they did. If the smart contract has to do with payments, assets can also be released directly by the smart contract. And the best part is the auditability and the traceability of blockchain can also add a lot of transparency for regulators, right? If there's a recall of goods and they need to understand which stakeholders in the end-to-end supply chain may be responsible for whatever the recalled item had a problem with, then they can just study the actions on the blockchain and also be able to go all the way back to the device that generated the raw data in the first place, right? So when we talk about this flow from sensors to data to insights to actions, for regulators, you can even go two ways, right? You can go the actions to the insights to the data to the sensor as a device, right? So it's really a win-win-win situation for a lot of people. And the only people that are losing is the corporations that really like to play in this opaque ecosystem and not be transparent, right? So again, as the world gets more and more digital and there's more misinformation out there, it's really important that we think about why this is important and why blockchain and IoT can help. So, I've talked about the general purpose of what IoTex's mission is. I've talked about a little bit about, the Pebble Tracker device itself, the data it generates, and why verifiability is important. Now let's talk about how we can use this in the real world, right? This is kind of the most common use case. It's actually, we just ran an ideathon for Pebble Tracker with the IoTeX community. We got over 150 submissions. Also the Mousebell community, I think there were some really great submissions from Mousebell as well. But this is one of the top 5 winners, and I think it's obviously one of the most obvious ones where verifiability is crucial, right? I'm not sure what's going on in Thailand with COVID-19, but as the world knows, the U.S. is struggling with this, and even with the vaccine rollout, right? So the verifiability of these things that have such a potential impact on the safety and the health of people, if you're if you're giving an expired vaccine to somebody, that's very, very dangerous, right? So it's not just about, who makes money where, but it's about protecting the people at the end of the day, right? So for this real world example, I'm going to walk you through a little bit of that sensors to data to insights to actions type of concept, right? So a real world scenario can be, vaccines or other sensitive materials need to be shipped below freezing temperature. If you deliver in the future, say that if you're dealing with a very, very important asset, you can layer on different types of incentives to make sure people, take an extra step to make sure that your assets delivered very well, right? So an incentive can look like if you deliver it below an average temperature of -10 degrees Celsius, then I'm going to pay you double, right? It's very important to me. So I'm going to consider paying you double or 1.2x or something like that. But if you breach 0 degrees Celsius at any time, then I'm going to take a deposit from you because you kind of disrupted my workflow, and you're putting my customers at risk or people at risk, right? So the verifiable data, when Pebble Tracker is attached to a shipment of vaccines or even within the cold chain, can tell you things like, the verifiable insight is not the raw data, but it's fitting the specific business case here, right? The insight is what tier of service was delivered by the person that's shipping these vaccines. Was it great service, so they get double pay? Was it average service, between -10 and 0 degrees, so it's considered okay? Or was it disastrous and they owe a penalty, right? So this is the flow of data to insights. And what smart contracts can do is you can automate this whole end-to-end process, especially the payment part of things, right? You can automate these terms, these coded service level agreements, and it doesn't have to be just a single metric, right? This is just talking about one single metric from Pebble Tracker, which is temperature, right? If you also wanted to add your own type of criteria for humidity, or you wanted to add your own criteria for light or GPS, these are all things that, if you wanted to set specific terms or incentives for how the asset is treated, then you could do that at a metric by metric level where, at the end of the day, the smart contract is going to be kind of assessing the different weightings that you apply and the different insights that you're gathering from Pebble Tracker in order to determine what the automated actions are, right? So if you think about this also not from a COVID perspective, but just from a tracking anything perspective, right? Pebble trackers, even installing 2 of these in the back of every cargo truck or in the back of or within an individual package that is deemed very highly sensitive or very valuable, you can get a full verifiable 360 view of that asset's environment and use smart contracts to really code what types of actions you want to take on that data. That is a very traditional supply chain asset tracking use case. Again, I think another, I think the very obvious use cases for something like this for Pebble Tracker and IoTeX is all about remote monitoring and asset tracking, right? So if you wanted to use Pebble Tracker as kind of a remote smoke sensor, it has a very high quality air quality. It has a very good air quality sensor that can tell you if there's chemicals or smoke in the air, right? So if you have a sensitive area of your home, even you can use Pebble Tracker to kind of measure that, to measure the temperature, to measure the humidity, things like that. So whether your asset is moving or your asset is not moving, there's many ways to use Pebble Tracker, and especially in the supply chain context, right? But Pebble Tracker is more than just an asset tracker, right? This is starting to get into some more futuristic concepts, I would say. And it really goes back to that Web 3.0 vision, right? To reconstruct what we can do today, but with Web 3.0 technology. So Pebble Tracker, generates these for metric, but how do we use our verifiable data and insights, right? We talked a lot about utilizing and analyzing our data through things like smart contracts, data visualization, in the future, confidential computing, if we want to kind of have privacy preserving computations across maybe parties that don't trust each other. Other things you can do with this is, you can just use it as a private data vault, right? There's no intermediaries in between you and your Pebble tracker. So just like with UCAM, the way UCAM works as a security camera is that, it uses your identity in order to make sure that all the data belongs only to you, right? Your keys, your funds, as far as what's popularized by Bitcoin, and we're applying that to your keys, your data, right? So things like decentralized identity, different identity and access management frameworks can let you really own and control your data. And once you own your data, you can choose to keep it private, or you can choose to utilize it within a DApp. And the other thing that's really interesting that I think IoTeX is pushing is the concept of monetizing and trading your data, not necessarily monetizing in the form of selling it outright in the data marketplace. That, of course, I think is something that will be very impactful in the future. But what IoTeX is really focusing on right now is bringing this data to the blockchain and also enabling new types of decentralized IoT use cases, right? So um, going back to that concept of, you have the verifiable insight. Now you can generate a verifiable action. That verifiable action can be so expansive and so broad, right? But here's some things that I think are very interesting concepts, and I hope you think they're interesting too. So, things like minting new digital assets based on the verifiable real world data, right? Say, for example, the NFT space is going crazy right now. But if you wanted to mint a real world NFT based on someone's verifiable GPS location, say that you went to Disneyland and you brought your Pebble tracker with you, or in the future, if Pebble trackers integrated into a cell phone case, something like that, then by proving verifiably that you were at a location at a certain point in time, then you can get a Disneyland NFT in a totally trustless way, right? Disneyland doesn't have to trust you. You don't have to trust Disneyland. You guys are using verifiable data and blockchain smart contracts to kind of facilitate that process. You can also trade these digital assets on different exchanges. Of course, in the future, data marketplaces are going to be very big, but we have to question, why should we trust the things that we're buying from that data marketplace if they're not verifiable? Or, I think there's already a $5 billion black market for data, especially IoT data out there, probably grown since I've gathered that statistic. But these are very important concepts around of why verifiability is important and what assets can be sparked by verifiable data. I'm going to talk about this one next, data as a service, right? Of course, this is kind of the utilization of data, whether it's to trigger different smart contract actions on IoTeX blockchain, whether it's to automate different multi-stakeholder processes and service level agreements. Things like, prediction markets are even possible, automation, decentralized autonomous organizations. These are all kind of what we call data as a service, right? But personally, one of my most favorite concept is this concept of crowdsourced data sets. And, IoTeX is really partnering with some really interesting companies that are already building on Pebble Tracker. And it's the concept of this data collective, right? If many people with Pebble trackers decide to combine their data in the aggregate, what types of data pools can we create? What types of machine learning models can we train? And what types of crowdsourced assets can we develop kind of bottoms up today, right? I think a great example of this is Waze. Waze is a company that's purchased by Google for, I think, $1.2 billion in 2013. And Waze is all about crowdsourcing insights from users about what the street looks like, right? Where are potholes? Where are police officers? Where are points of interest? And all of that information is user-generated content, right? So if you think about it, why don't the users that help to create that company or create that service or create that application into the billion-dollar company that it is, what do users get out of it? Why don't they own part of the pie, right? So the concept of building verifiable data sets from the ground up in a crowdsourced fashion, I think is going to be a very, very interesting part of the future where contributors to these data sets can also be shareholders in their future value, right? And this is just a simple schematic of what this looks like. But as I mentioned, we're working with some really interesting companies. One of them is out of the University of Waterloo, which is one of the top tech universities in Canada. And they are building the first kind of decentralized air quality index on their school, right? So this is a very interesting concept we would love to also invite anyone on this call to pursue, is if you want to build kind of a decentralized air quality index, temperature index, or just understand how air quality is looking around your campus, you can definitely do that with Pebble Tracker, right? And also, if anyone wants to purchase that information or to access that information, then you can become shareholders in the future value of that information, especially as it gets denser and broader. It's not really about, pricing your data in fiat dollar terms. It's more about using tokens to denominate your fractional ownership of that data set or that digital asset based on how much you contributed to it, right? And I think that is really in the Web3 spirit, right? You own your data, you decide what to do with it, and you get paid or rewarded for doing those things. Another really interesting use case that I love is we are working with a company called Scale and they're a federated machine learning company based in Sweden. And they are trying to use Pebble trackers to train machine learning models, but only with verifiable data. Machine learning is a very centralized process today. A lot of the data collection, the model development, and the prediction generation is all done by one party. And that's because it's very hard to trust what data you capture, right? So the fact that Pebble Tracker can deliver absolutely verifiable data, it really presents a new option for model developers to decouple the data collection step and the model development step. So we actually just launched our partnership with them last week, and we're going to be building the first verifiable and blockchain-based community-owned machine learning models on IoTeX, where, again, those that provide data to these data collectives can receive fractional ownership of the future value. And there's so many other cool use cases that people were building with Pebble Tracker, right? One of them is actually called Pebble Go. It's kind of like a Pokemon Go style game that when you prove your it's kind of like the proof of presence. If you prove your presence at a certain location, then you get a certain NFT. So we're working on some cool things, especially in San Francisco, trying to set up, I guess, different scavenger hunt type of things. But these are all really interesting foundational components, right? I don't want people to think that these are the end goals of these things, but the fact that we can have crowdsourced machine learning models, the fact that we can have user-owned data sets, and the fact that we can have maps that are maintained by users and beneficial to users, these are all just step one, right? Imagine once we add insurance on top of it, or we add some decentralized finance on top of it, then we're really embracing that Web3 spirit that we talked about before, where we're recreating the functionality of Web 2.0, but from a user-centric and user-beneficial standpoint. So with that, I want to end my presentation by mentioning that IoTeX is a very fast-growing network. Our developer network is growing fast. Our users are growing fast. We have real-world products that are powered by our blockchain. And what we would love most is for people that share our vision and share, if anything interested you in my presentation today, please reach out. And we are looking to offer you grants to build the future on IoTeX. So there's many different types of grants that we give. We have a wish list of things that are more they're more kind of standard stuff, like we have a lot of already great components of our platform, like wallets and explorers and SDKs and IDEs and things like this. But if there's something that someone's built for another network and it's on our wish list, we do fund these types of things. But the more interesting side of the grant program is the open-ended proposals, right? We want to hear exactly what you want to build on IoTeX. What are you guys building in supply chain right now? How can Pebble Tracker help you in those kind of scenarios? or if you just want to join one of these data collectives, you can. So it's a very, very expressive way to work with the device and to work with the IoTeX blockchain. So I really invite all of you guys to check out IoTeX. You can learn a very high-level overview of the main concepts at our website. It's called onboard.iotex.io. Our main website is iotex.io. Our Twitter is iotex_io. And we have a group on Telegram where I think there's about 15,000 members on there.
Yeah, any professors or students on the call want to chime in about how you think you might be able to use one of these trackers and any questions you had?
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
So I have kind of a question for the paper tracker.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very secure hardware, right? But how about the speed at which it like inform the user or the system about like there's a change in anything? Because
Mm-hmm.
blockchain is like it's secure, but their speed is not so much.
That's a good question. So, IoTeX is actually very, very fast. We do 5-second blocks with instant finality. So that just means the data. So every 5 seconds, a new finalized block is minted on IoTeX blockchain, right?
Oh, I
But
see.
as far as Pebble Tracker, the thing I didn't really mention, didn't really have time to cover all the nitty gritty details of Pebble Tracker, but the firmware is fully open source. So if you want to customize Pebble Tracker to your needs, um, you can think about Pebble Tracker as out of the box, very functional, but out of the box, all of these type of peripherals will be fully on, right? But when you apply these into production settings, you really have to specify the firmware in a way that's very tailor fit to your solution, right? Things like, okay, I want this thing to wake up every minute, every hour, every day, even, and grab data and send it to the blockchain. Or you want it to be 24/7. You can do every second even, right? But that's really the benefit of the open source firmware, is you can adjust those settings. You can have some prototyping settings that are more easy to prototype with, and then you can customize it to fit production settings. But out of the box, we're trying to create a lot of different ways that people can just use it completely out of the box, start to mine some information, mine data, feed smart contracts, but in more professional settings, you can configure it to how exactly you want it to be used.
We also had some comments on the Facebook Live that someone is actually working on an air quality project in the north as well. So I think 100% we want to see how we can get some Pebble trackers out to these Thai universities. So Larry and I will get together on that and post details in the Facebook group and newsletter. And, we can go through and help them prepare a grant through the grant program, see if Mouseboat can help fund some trackers through the crowdfunding campaign.
Right.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for your presentation. It was excellent and very comprehensible. Working with the university, I trust that when you're talking a lot about trusted data, trusted everything. So this could be deployed in so many projects that we in Thailand are struggling with. And give an idea for my students to pick. And then there are many ongoing problems nowadays that we need to solve, and we need trusted data, we need trusted insight, and of course trusted action to solve the problem once and for all. And this would be a light to shed onto the inquiries to find what they should do. And this is the lecture and the presentation that allows my student, if there are some of here in this class, in this course, or they can come and watch later, that to learn how they can actually use the data, and of course especially from Pepper Tracker to make it happen, to make things happen. I have no tech background at all, but I'm from law background, so I can see this, that the statement of if this then could make a lot of things, and especially when it's in smart contract, it save a lot of energy and headache and cost and also and money. And
well,
it
that's
could
the thing too, right? You mentioned you're a law professor, and I think that is also a very important puzzle piece in this whole thing, right? Because
right.
the adoption of this, I used to work in consulting for 5 years, right? I know that enterprises don't change their practices unless regulations demand them to, right? So the faster we can educate people on the difference between semi-trusted and fully trusted is when those laws are going to change and when those technologies are going to be adopted, right? It's a very virtuous cycle in that respect. So
Exactly.
even if there's other folks that are non-technical, right? I can speak the language, but I'm not a technical developer at all. But it requires a full understanding of the business landscape, the law landscape, and the technology landscape to solve this very end-to-end issue, right?
Yeah, true. Well, I would definitely urge my student to watch this clip and learn, because we in the class I mentioned smart contract, I mentioned trusted information and transparency and all that are needed when you want to make a legal transactions in digital environment. So this is exciting.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
we should chat some more after this.
Yes.
Learn more.
Yes.
Yeah, great. Well, Larry's been so generous to offer his time. We're over the hour now, so I want to let him go. And also so generous to share his email and know that he's happy to hear from you directly. So I can also just share your email with all of these professors, right, Larry?
Yes, absolutely. Anyone on the call, Larry at IoTeX.io. Feel free to email me.
Right.
Yes. Super great of you. Thank you so much again. We're really excited about this Thai University initiative. I've been telling Larry about it since we started it, and we're all looking forward to working closely with these professors and maybe doing some cool projects.
Excellent. Great. Well, thank you so much for everyone watching. And again, we'll look forward to building some great stuff together. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Thank you.
Hi, guys.
Kapun ka, everyone.
Sawasdee ka.